I never thought that unlocking my own front door would end up being the moment I realized my son had sold me out. That Friday morning in early June, I was still wearing my Aaron's cardigan, the navy one with the frayed cuff, when Christy pushed past me without so much as a hello. 3 designer bags hit the floor of the foyer like a warning shot. She said, "We'll be staying here now," like it was already done. I asked, "Did you ask me first?" But before she could answer, Josh came in behind her, balancing a case of oat milk and smiling like we were all in on the same joke. "Mom, this is her place too," he said, like I'd just forgotten. My hand was still on the deed folder I'd had notarized 3 days ago at Fremont Title and Escrow. I'd gone alone. I hadn't told anyone. Christy walked right into the guest room without waiting for permission. I heard her unzip one of the bags, call out something about finally having closet space, then shut the door behind her like it belonged to her. Josh stayed in the kitchen long enough to open my fridge, drink straight from the orange juice carton, and complain about the heat pump being slow. Then he disappeared after her. I stood there staring at the juice, the suitcase, the door. My name was still on every utility, every tax form, every line of the mortgage that I'd finished paying off in 2014. But the way he said it, her place too, cut through all of it. I had wanted to believe they saw this house as a grace I extended, not a prize they were entitled to. My name is Gloria Jensen, retired librarian 66, widowed since 2020, and until that afternoon, I had let Christy's entitlement go unchecked since the day she married my son Joshua, who used to visit weekly before his wife began calling this house excess storage. In the early days, I thought she was just awkward, polished but stiff. I'd hosted the bridal shower myself, swept the porch, arranged daffodils, made lemon squares from scratch. Christy showed up late, complimented the flowers like they were fake, and spent most of the afternoon texting under the table. Still, I tried. That first Christmas, I gave them a check for $1,000 and a quilt I'd sewn by hand. Christy didn't open it, just asked if I'd mind watching the dog so they could pop down to Mexico for the week. I said yes, even though I hated that dog and hadn't been on a plane since Harold died. Over the next year, Josh's visits dwindled to quick drop-ins, garage pickups, tax questions, requests for coffee pods. Then came the comments that my furniture was dated, that the kitchen was an antique, that nobody under 40 uses dish soap in a bottle anymore. I smiled through all of it because I thought it was temporary. A phase, a stretch of growing pains for a young couple trying to find their way. But by year 2, they weren't finding their way. They were cutting mine off. I caught Christy once photographing my living room. Angles, close-ups, wide shots. I asked what for, and she said, just inspiration for our future place. Though it was my rug, my walls, my grandfather's clock in every frame. Josh didn't say a word. Later that week, I noticed she'd moved the picture of Harold from the mantel to the hallway, replaced it with a framed print of a quote about new beginnings. I asked her where she'd found it, and she said, Pinterest. I thought it brought better energy. Over 2 years, Christy had suggested I downsize, tossed out my heirloom china to declutter, and last month brought in a real estate agent to appraise my home behind my back. But hearing Josh call it her place was the final slap I didn't see coming. The china was my mother's, ivory porcelain with faded lilac trim. I found the shards wrapped in newspaper inside the recycling bin 2 days after Christy's spring cleaning spree. No note, no apology, just a trail of bubble wrap leading out to the garage where her boutique boxes now filled the shelves Harold had built for his tools. When I asked, she said, "It was chipped, Gloria. Besides, you haven't used it in years." I reminded her it was mine. She smiled like that was cute. Josh said nothing, just tapped at his phone. Then came the real estate woman, Sandra, mid-40s, bold lipstick, leather portfolio. I found her standing in my hallway measuring the baseboards. I asked who she was, and she replied, "Oh, I thought you knew. Christy said this was a potential listing." That night, Josh acted like it was a misunderstanding. Christy giggled over wine and said, "It never hurts to know what your options are." I looked at my kitchen clock. 8:17 p.m. I remember that. It's when I felt the switch flip. Something slid cold and solid into place behind my ribs. But it wasn't until that morning on the porch, when I heard my son speak with that bland, practiced certainty, this is her place too, that the truth settled in. I wasn't misunderstanding anything. They didn't see me as confused or emotional or overly attached. They saw me as in the way. And somewhere along the line, my son had stopped protecting the woman who raised him and started helping his wife erase her. I sat in the sunroom that afternoon without turning the light on. Just sat there, one shoe off, the other still laced. I stared at my hands and realized something. They had taken everything they could without asking, and the next move would be to take the rest, on paper. That night, over chamomile and peanut brittle, my oldest friend Carla from my church circle listened without interruption, then pulled out a yellow legal pad and said, "List everything you've paid for since they got married. Every cent, Gloria." We sat at her kitchen table, the one with the burn mark from an old crockpot mishap and one wobbly leg Harold used to fix every Thanksgiving. Carla didn't blink when I told her about the appraiser. She didn't gasp when I mentioned the china. But when I said Josh had let Christy change the Wi-Fi password without telling me, she pressed her palm flat on the table like she was bracing for impact. That's when she reached for the pad. "No emotion," she said. "Just the numbers. We're going to treat this like a budget audit." She uncapped her pen and handed it to me. "Start with the loan." I wrote down $18,000 for the private student loan I'd co-signed during Josh's last year at Cal Poly. Then $2,250 for the Airbnb I paid for when their honeymoon plans fell through 3 days before the wedding. I paused, then added $1,100 for the replacement tires he needed when Christy refused to drive her car to Lake Chelan for Christmas. I kept going, cell phone bill top-ups, boutique shelving Christy said would help the garage look more organized, and utilities I never asked them to help with, not once. When I totaled the figures, Carla let out a low whistle. "You're not generous, Gloria. You're underwriting their lifestyle." She flipped the page and titled it In-Kind Contributions. That's where we listed the storage, the guest room, the groceries, the Wi-Fi, the space heater Christy dragged into the garage for her, quote, inventory processing days. Carla added a final line in her own handwriting. Time spent enabling their fantasy. I trusted Josh because I co-signed his $18,000 private student loan, covered their honeymoon Airbnb with $2,250 from my emergency CD, and let them temporarily store Christy's boutique inventory in my garage without charging a cent in rent or utilities for 19 months. When he asked me to co-sign, he was still sweet, still called me Mama G, said he just needed a little help to finish strong, and I believed him. Christy had just moved in. She never asked, only smiled tight whenever I brought out tea or asked if they wanted dinner. That was before she started talking about energy flow and the heaviness of inherited clutter. I was still setting out towels in the guest bath then, still thinking this was a season of adjustment, not a takeover. The honeymoon money came after Harold's death. I just liquidated a CD to cover a few plumbing issues and found I had enough left over. Josh called in a panic, said the cabin they booked had fallen through, that Christy was crying, and that he didn't want their marriage to start in disappointment. I wired it that same day. He said thank you. She didn't. As for the boutique stock, it began with 3 plastic bins, then racks, then pallets. Christy had a label printer, mood boards taped up in the garage, and a whiteboard with quarterly goals. I was told not to park inside anymore, because of the dust. She started locking the interior garage door. I didn't say a word, not even when my gardening tools disappeared into one of her labeled bins. I found my pruning shears next to sequined scarves. When I brought it up, Josh shrugged and said, "It's not like you were using them." Every time I swallowed a slight, I told myself it was for peace, for family. But writing the numbers down with Carla stripped the softness from those memories. There was no warmth in the math, only proof. Proof that generosity had turned to leverage I no longer controlled. I looked at the list again. The total sat just above $28,000. And I knew I needed receipts when Christy casually suggested turning my sewing room into a nursery, just in case. I smiled and told her I'd think about it, though something about the way she measured the walls made my stomach turn. She'd come in with a tape measure and paint samples tucked in her bag. Not a conversation, not even a question. just started holding swatches up to the light and muttering things like, "Mint feels more gender neutral than sage, right?" I stood in the doorway while she stepped around my fabric shelves, trailing her fingers along the edge of Harold's drafting table like it was an antique on loan. I asked if there was news, trying to keep my voice light. She waved it off with a half smile. "No, nothing official. But it's time to prepare. We'll need the space." We, that word again. She said it with ease, like I wasn't standing 10 feet away inside the house I paid off, surrounded by my things. I waited until she left to close the door. Not slam, just close. I turned slowly and looked at what filled that room. My embroidery thread, sorted by shade, my tin of chalks and shears, Harold's old stool, still scuffed from when he'd spill coffee and mutter about the paper curling on humid days. I had plans to donate some of the quilts this fall. The baby ones were already boxed for the NICU at St. Agnes. I wasn't hoarding space. I was holding onto a corner of my life that still felt like mine. That night I walked through the house and counted the things that had changed. The wine rack that used to be Harold's gun case, the powder blue couch Christy picked from some influencer's Instagram, the curtains she replaced while I was at an eye exam. I had let it happen piece by piece, thinking it was easier than confrontation. 2 weeks later, I got a joint account authorization form in the mail from a bank I didn't use, with a sticky note in Josh's handwriting. "Just sign at the bottom, it's easier for taxes," and I shredded it silently. No envelope. Just the form, folded once, slipped into my stack of mail between a gardening catalog and a pre-approved credit offer. The note was on yellow paper, the same kind I used to pack in his school lunches, with Bible verses or reminders to be kind. Now it was taped to a form that would have given them access to whatever assets I hadn't already locked down. No call, no conversation, just the assumption I'd go along. I sat at the kitchen table and read every line of that document. It was from a bank I'd never opened an account with, Westridge Capital. Josh had listed himself as the joint party and Christy as authorized agent. The tone was all smiles and shortcuts. Streamline your finances, simplify estate planning. Nowhere did it mention the words I heard behind it. Take control, bypass her. I flipped it over, then over again. No instructions for mailing it back, just a return address. I realized they must have intended for me to hand it over. Probably at dinner. Probably with Christy setting down a glass of wine and saying something like, "It's just paperwork, Gloria, you're overthinking it." Instead, I fed the entire thing into my shredder, slowly, not out of spite, out of precision. I watched the strips fall into the basket and then emptied it into a separate bag I tied and took straight out to the bin, under the cat litter and last week's freezer burn. I didn't want any part of it in the house. I didn't call Josh. I didn't text. I let the silence stand. If he noticed, he didn't show it. But something about the confidence with which they sent that form made me certain. This wasn't desperation. It was a plan, and next time they'd come at me with charm, not paper. In late May, I overheard Christy on speakerphone telling her friend, "It's basically ours, once we change the locks," and I quietly backed out of the hallway, my heart racing. It was mid-afternoon. I'd just come back from the pharmacy and was heading to the laundry room with a fresh box of dryer sheets when I heard her voice, brighter than usual, casual, like she was talking about weekend plans. The hallway creaked beneath me, so I paused before the door, meaning only to knock and let her know I was home. But then I heard it, her exact words. "She's still here, but it's basically ours once we change the locks." No hesitation, just confidence. I don't know if it was the way she said ours, or the certainty in once, not if, but it broke something. I backed away without a sound, clutching the box to my chest like it might muffle the pounding in my ears. I went straight out the back door and sat in the car with the windows up, parked in my own driveway like a stranger, trying not to be seen. For 10 minutes I did nothing but breathe and press my thumb against the cardboard corner until it tore the skin. Then I unlocked my phone and started a new note. Titled it, Incidents. First line, May 27th. "Christy, phone call, once we change the locks." That was the first entry. Later that night she offered to make dinner. Told me to relax. Said she felt like we were finally finding a rhythm. I nodded, took my plate, and ate every bite without tasting a thing. I watched her laugh at Josh's stories, heard her talk about building a joint Amazon account to streamline household purchases, and smiled like a woman who didn't know she was being replaced in her own home. On June 1st, they held a barbecue on my patio with their friends while I was away at a doctor's appointment, and when I returned and found my bedroom door locked from the inside, Josh told me, "We just needed privacy for a nap." The car smelled like disinfectant and peppermint from the clinic. I had been gone 2 hours. Routine blood work, nothing urgent. But when I pulled into the driveway, I saw folding chairs and paper plates scattered across my lawn. The grill was still warm. Empty bottles lined the windowsill. Someone had left a cigarette butt on the armrest of my porch rocker. Christy's laugh echoed faintly from the kitchen as I stepped inside, keys still in hand. They had used my patio furniture without asking. Served drinks I didn't buy. Invited people I'd never met. My hibiscus planter had been knocked over near the hose reel. Nobody said a word as I walked past the mess. I made it down the hall, turned the knob of my bedroom, and it wouldn't budge. I stood there for a moment, heartbeat thudding in my ear. I tried again, twisting harder. Locked. I knocked once, sharp, not loud. After a pause, Josh's voice came from the other side. "We just needed privacy for a nap." No apology, no explanation, just that, like it was nothing. I didn't respond. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. Christy was there, plating the last of a fruit tart. She smiled. "We didn't think you'd be back this early," she said, like it was her house, and I was the guest who'd overstayed. I nodded, set the glass down, left the room. I waited until after they left that night. Then I went back to the door and unlocked it, with the spare key I'd hidden behind the top bookshelf. They hadn't touched much, just the blinds and the bedspread. Flipped over, rumpled. I didn't cry. I opened the closet and pulled out the deed again. Held it under the hallway light and read every line, every date. Then I called Carla and said, "It's time." That night I sat at the kitchen table with a padlock in one hand and the property deed in the other, and decided that the next time someone asked whose house this was, I'd have paperwork ready. The padlock was still in its plastic packaging. I had picked it up weeks ago from the hardware store, meaning to use it for the garden shed. But that night, I held it like a symbol, solid, weighty, final. Across from it lay the folder Carla helped me organize. Deed, marriage certificate, Harold's will, property tax statements, notarized and dated. I kept flipping the pages like I needed to memorize them. Not just for court, not even for Josh. For me. To remember I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't overreacting. The last time Harold and I reviewed that deed, he'd used a red pen to underline our names. We'd laughed about it, how official he liked to feel. Now his handwriting felt like a witness. His absence roared louder than any of Christy's digs or Josh's silences. He would have locked the doors after that barbecue. He would have thrown their wine down the sink. But I hadn't. I'd let them stay, let them rearrange, let them talk around me like I was already gone. Until now, I stood up and walked room to room, counted what was mine, what was left. The couch? Mine. The lamp next to it? Bought by Christy. The blanket folded neatly on top? Made by me? For Josh's dorm room in 2006. I took it back to my bedroom. By midnight, I had moved the deed and the folder into the locked drawer of Harold's file cabinet, pulled the spare keys from the drawer beside the stove, and replaced them with dummies from a set I bought at Goodwill. Then I installed the padlock on the garage door from inside and tested it twice. The next morning, I went to Bank First and removed Josh as the secondary beneficiary on my account, canceled the $900 monthly transfer I'd set up 2 years ago to help with rent, and moved everything to a new savings account in my name only. I wore my gray slacks and the maroon blouse with buttons that didn't pull. No makeup, no earrings, just a plain purse with the folder inside. The teller recognized me. Said, "Good to see you again, Mrs. Jensen," like this was routine. I nodded politely and asked to speak with someone about beneficiary changes. Within 5 minutes, I was seated in a small glass office with a woman named Yvette, who smelled faintly of mint and understood the word quiet better than most. I handed over my ID and the form I'd filled out at home. Yvette reviewed it, tapped a few keys, and confirmed Josh's name had been tied to both my checking and my automatic monthly transfer, $900 on the 3rd of every month. I asked how soon we could stop it. She said immediately. I said, do it. She clicked through the cancellation and printed me confirmation before I even had time to second-guess myself. I also requested a new savings account, linked to no other parties. No online access. Paper statements only. She didn't flinch, just asked what name I wanted it under. I said, Gloria R. Jensen. She smiled and said, good. Before I left, she handed me the updated account summary and asked if there was anything else. I hesitated. Then I asked how often people remove family members from accounts. She paused just long enough to let me know she'd seen it before. It happens, she said. When people realize generosity doesn't always mean trust. I walked out with a stamped envelope, 2 receipts, and a deadline in my head. Next withdrawal date was June 3rd. They wouldn't get a penny. By Thursday, I had retrieved every document. My late husband's will, the quitclaim deed, tax records, and utility bills in my name, scanned them to Carla's Dropbox, and locked the originals in my church friend Alan's fireproof safe. It took 4 hours to gather everything. I started in the filing cabinet, but half of it was too old to matter. I needed clean proof, dates, signatures, notarizations. I pulled out the thick blue binder from the top shelf of the linen closet, where Harold used to hide cash for emergencies. Inside were the last 4 years of our tax returns, all filed jointly, all with my name listed first. The will was folded into a plastic sleeve, pages thin from being handled too many times. I unfolded it, pressed it flat, and reread the clause that left the entirety of real estate property at 311 Mason Lake Drive to me with no conditions. I ran my finger along the ink and whispered, "You knew?" I scanned everything at Carla's that evening. Her living room smelled like pot roast and eucalyptus, and we didn't speak much. Just the whir of the scanner, the shuffle of pages, the occasional sigh from both of us. She offered to organize the files into folders with labels: property, financial, legal, and MISC. I watched her drag them into Dropbox like someone building armor. Alan met us after choir practice in the church basement. He brought the safe key on a silver chain around his neck, pulled it off, and placed the whole keyring in my hand without a word. We slipped the envelope inside, along with a flash drive backup, and he spun the dial with a precision that felt rehearsed. "That safe's bolted to the floor," he said. "It's not going anywhere. Neither are you." On the drive home, I checked the rearview mirror 3 times. Not out of fear, just habit. I hadn't told Josh I'd be out. I didn't owe him an itinerary. Carla helped me contact attorney Lila Dorsey from her Bible study group, who agreed to draft a formal notice of trespass and lease termination, and Alan agreed to change the locks and install a camera on the porch, pro bono. Lila answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm but sharp, the kind that didn't waste air on pleasantries. Carla gave her the background, I filled in the rest. Lila didn't gasp or pity me. She asked about the deed, utility bills, and how long they'd been in the house. When I said, "They've never paid rent," she paused. "Perfect. That makes this easier." By the next morning, I had a draft in my inbox. Notice to vacate, unauthorized occupancy, 6 paragraphs, legally sound, cold as stone. Christie's name wasn't even on it. Josh was listed only as a non-tenant relative. Lila attached a second document, inventory of personal effects, with blank spaces to list every item they'd brought into the house. "Serve them in writing," she said. "And photograph the posting. We're not asking, we're documenting." Alan came over that afternoon. He carried a red toolbox and a flat metal box under one arm. We didn't talk much. He took the old lock out in under 10 minutes and replaced it with a keypad deadbolt. No keyholes, no picking. Then he mounted a wireless camera above the door, angled clean toward the front steps. He held out a small black monitor. "You'll hear the chime when someone walks up, even before they knock." We tested it twice. Then I opened my folder, placed the printed notices inside, and labeled the envelope, "Service Documents, June 8th. Carla brought over a small corkboard to hang near the guest room. "Post it where they can't miss it," she said. No shouting, no drama. Let the law speak. I looked at my kitchen clock. 4:12 p.m. The same hands Harold used to check every morning with his coffee. I stood up straighter than I had in weeks. I wasn't asking for respect anymore. I was assigning consequences. On Saturday morning, while Josh and Christy were out at brunch, I posted the notice on the guest room door, addressed to unauthorized occupants, and attached a printed inventory of their items with a 48-hour window for retrieval. I used 2 brass tacks and a strip of clear tape. Made sure the corners lay flat. The header was bold, formal notice to vacate, and the tone left no room for confusion. I included the address, the date, and the statement of non-tenancy. Beneath that, in neat bullet points, was every item of theirs I could account for. 7 black plastic storage bins, 1 ring light, 2 rolling clothing racks, 27 individually bagged boutique items, 1 Bluetooth speaker, a foldable table, and 3 empty cardboard boxes labeled Christie Boutique. It took me half an hour to draft the list and another 10 minutes to triple-check the language. Carla had helped me practice reading it aloud the night before. No quiver, no apology. "You're not evicting them," she said. "You're restoring your space." Once the notice was up, I stepped back and snapped 3 photos. One of the whole door, one of the document, and one with that morning's newspaper held next to it. Date and context. I emailed them to Lila and uploaded a copy to Carla's Dropbox, just in case. Then I went outside and waited. Sat on the porch with a cup of lukewarm tea and a lined notepad in my lap. When their car pulled up at 11:52 a.m., I didn't get up. Josh came in first. Christy followed with a leftover container and a straw still in her mouth. The moment she saw the door, she stopped. Tilted her head like she couldn't read. Josh read it twice, then shouted, "What is this?" but didn't touch the paper. I didn't raise my voice. I stood in the doorway, hands by my side, and said, "This is my home." "That's a legal notice. You have 48 hours. Christy's mouth opened, then closed. She didn't blink. Behind me, the camera chimed. That evening, Josh stormed in yelling, "What is this?" while Christy filmed me with her phone and shouted, "You can't evict family." But I calmly pointed to the notarized deed in the lawyer's envelope and said, "You're not family on paper." They came back louder than I expected. Christy had mascara streaks under her eyes and a phone already recording before the door even shut. Josh was red-faced, pacing, spitting out words like manipulated, ungrateful, and after everything we've done. He kept waving his arms like he was trying to swat flies, but none of it touched me. I didn't move from the armchair. Christy zeroed in on the camera in the corner. "Did you install surveillance on us? Without telling us?" Her voice pitched higher, playing panic. I stood up and opened the folder I'd placed on the side table. 1 tabbed page at a time. Deed, utility bills, tax records, the will, all with my name only. I held up the envelope and said, "You're not listed on anything. Not this house. Not this account. Not this name." Josh muttered something about intentions and community property. But the words were thin now, like air leaking from a balloon. He reached for the notice, still posted on the guest room door, and ripped it down. "This is insane. You're seriously doing this?" I met his eyes for the first time in weeks. "You let her measure the nursery." That stopped him. Christy kept filming, circling the room slowly like a documentarian. "This will not look good online," she said. "You're kicking your own family out." I walked over to the coffee table, picked up the stack of receipts, and laid them next to the envelope. "Then post it with these. Every dollar I gave. Every month you took. Every warning I didn't say out loud." By Monday at 10 a.m., we stood in the lobby of Bank First, where I'd scheduled a formal meeting with the property officer, and I handed over every notarized document, while Josh argued loudly with the bank manager about, quote, community rights. The appointment confirmation was printed and folded in my purse, marked with a yellow highlighter, just in case. Carla offered to come with me, but I said no. This wasn't a prayer circle moment, this was a signature moment. I wore Harold's watch and my winter coat, even though it was too warm for it. I wanted to feel covered. Josh had insisted on coming, probably assuming I wouldn't follow through. But the moment we stepped into that air-conditioned lobby, I saw the shift in him. He thought it would be a conversation. A misunderstanding to fix. He didn't understand that I'd turned the page already. The property officer, Ms. Flores, greeted me with a firm handshake and a fresh notepad. "You're here to update account authority and property records?" I said yes and slid the folder across the table. She opened it slowly, nodding as she scanned each page. The quitclaim deed, the updated trust form, my revised beneficiary list. Josh leaned forward, interrupting every few minutes. "She's not understanding the full picture. We've been cohabiting for months. There are rights, common law elements." He sounded like he'd Googled it in the car. Miss Flores didn't flinch. She turned to me, confirmed my name, reviewed the dates on the ownership documents, and said clearly, "Based on this file, the house is yours. Solely. No lease, no co-title, no joint tenancy. There is no legal basis for them to remain." I signed the transfer forms for the account changes. She stamped them on the spot. Josh stared at the desk. "You're really doing this?" he muttered. I closed the folder. "I already did." The bank officer, Ms. Flores, reviewed the papers, verified my sole ownership and Christie's lack of tenancy, then folded her hands and said, "Mr. Jensen, unless your mother agrees to grant you occupancy, you must vacate the premises by 5 p.m. today." Josh blinked like he hadn't heard her right. "Today?" he said, voice rising with each syllable. Miss Flores repeated it, slower this time. "By 5. She slid the documents back toward me, her tone neutral but final. No room for protest. I slipped them into the folder and gave her a nod. In the parking lot, Josh started walking ahead like a child who didn't want to be seen with his parent. He didn't open the car door for Christy. He didn't say a word. I let the silence stretch all the way home. At the house, Christy was on the porch with a smoothie and her phone in hand. When Josh told her, she laughed, short and high, like it couldn't possibly be real. "You're joking," she said. He wasn't. She tossed her cup into my recycling bin and stormed inside. I followed behind, calm. I reminded them they had 8 hours left. I told them the garage would remain locked until I was present for the removal of inventory. Josh muttered something about staying the night, just to figure it out. I looked him in the eye. "If you're here after 5, I will call a sheriff. This is not a bluff." He must have believed me. By noon, they were boxing up Christie's boutique items in silence. By 2, the spare room was nearly bare. I didn't help. I went into my sewing room and sorted bobbins by color, letting the sound of packing tape stretch and snap behind the walls like music I didn't have to hear anymore. At exactly 4:47 p.m., I handed them a box with their shoes through the storm door, turned the new key in the lock, and walked back into my quiet house, feeling the weight of their noise finally lift. They hadn't spoken to me in over an hour. Christy sulked by the trunk of their car, arms crossed, makeup smudged. Josh stood on the porch like he was waiting for someone to step in, a neighbor, a pastor, the ghost of Harold maybe. But no one came. Just the sound of their own footsteps on my walk, packing up a life they'd tried to live without earning. The final box was labeled miscellaneous. I didn't ask what was in it. I opened the door just wide enough to slide it through. Christy looked at me like she wanted to spit. Josh didn't look at me at all. "You'll regret this," she said. "I already did," I replied, and shut the storm door gently. I turned the new deadbolt with steady hands. It clicked clean. No jiggle, no resistance. Then I walked back to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and sat with both feet planted flat on the floor. No shouting, no drawers opening without permission. No pretending anymore. Just quiet,